Hey, this is Aaron from digitalCrafts, and today I'm going to show you a quick HTML page that I wrote. It uses dynamic JavaScript to populate a page. It calls a third-party API. An API, think about it as you're using a library or someone else's database, someone else's information, and you're making a call out there saying, hey, I want this information, and it gives it back to you. So if I refresh this page, it's get your weather and enter your current location. Now let's say I don't enter anything and I just submit it and said, hey, nothing's found here. I live in Seattle, so I'm going to put that in there and I'm going to submit it. And it's giving me this little GIF, sad face because it's cloudy outside in Seattle. You look at the sky and you will see clouds. The temperature is 72 degrees. Now let's say I misspell this. It says, hey, this doesn't exist. And I remember, oh, that's right, there's an E at the end. So I'm going to play that, hit that, and everything works. So let's go over the code for this and kind of show you how I built this. So before we start, let's go over the concepts really quickly. So in HTML, we use Bootstrap, which is a third-party user interface library. And I really like using it because it speeds up development time. It makes your text look nicer, the buttons look better, and they have classes that you use instead of using a lot of CSS. You use these classes and it makes it a lot quicker. And most of this is responsive, meaning it looks good on large screens and small screens. And then in CSS file, we used Flex and Grid. And these are great ways to line everything up, center it, or put it wherever you want. And there's documentation. And then for JavaScript, we use XML HTTP requests. This is when you're using vanilla JavaScript and you want to call a third-party library or API. And I'll go over that in a little bit. And again, there's the documentation. OpenWeather API is the API that we're going to use. And then getElementById. This is a way that if you want to add information or take away information from an element using vanilla JavaScript, you use a getElementById. So the first file that we use is main.html. And you see right here I have Bootstrap 4. And this is just the CDN, meaning the Content Delivery Network. If you go to the Bootstrap 4 website, they're going to say, hey, if you use Bootstrap, copy and paste this into your website. So that's what I did. And then down here is my main.js file and my style.css file. Now, you could put everything on one page, but it gets to be a little cumbersome and hard to maintain. So what generally you do is you have different files. So I have a different file for my JavaScript and my different file for CSS. Now later on, if you learn a front-end framework such as Vue.js or React, they have their own way of doing this. But if you're using vanilla JavaScript, this is generally the easiest way to maintain your code. Right down here, you have a div. And in this div is a class called container. This is a Bootstrap class. And what this does is it kind of makes sure the code is a little more centered in the page. It makes sure that it's not touching the edge. So get weather, and you have this form group. It's a form, and in the form you have three parts. You have this label, enter your current location, the input, which is the box the user will enter the input, and you have this A tag, which is basically a button. If you look at the href, meaning when you click it, it goes to submit form. So it takes all the information from here and it goes to JavaScript. Right down here you have a p tag with an ID of error. This is something that I created. And also you have an ID for results. So this is where the errors show up and this is where the results show up. So let's go to style, CSS. And you see for the container I put a margin top of 10%. Basically when you do a website you normally have a header on top, some sort of menu that people can navigate, but I don't need it here. So I moved my content down 10% just so it's not touching the top of the screen. It looks a little nicer. The errors, I use something called display flex, and I justified content center. And the reason why I did this is because I always want to make sure my error text is in the center of the element. And then padding, which gives it a little padding. If you do see something like this way, the first number is for top and bottom, and the second number is for right and left. So I wanted 10 pixels top, 10 pixels bottom, 0 on the left, 0 extra on the right. There's already enough padding on the right and left. For the results, I wanted a grid system. And the reason why I wanted a grid system is because I wanted this image and this text to be on the same line. If I got rid of this, this text is going to go on this line underneath. And I just don't think it looks good. I want to have more control over it. And actually, let's take a look. I don't know if you know you can do this, but you can inspect the element, and it will show you the CSS. So if you go to results, and I get rid of display grid, see how my text is down here? Or if I do the columns, it says, it moves the text around here. So grid saying we're going to have this grid style system, right? And you see right there, and it's 40/60. And there's two columns, one being 40%, one being 60%. And then on the bottom, I have my results for display, flex, and justify content. And all this does is take this text right here, make it H3, meaning it's a header element, it's larger, and making sure it's always centered no matter what. So let's get to the real meat of this. And this is the JavaScript, which is what fills the content of it. So if we go back to main HTML, you see this submit form. Well, that goes right here. And right over here, I basically clear out all the old information. What I was finding is if I didn't have any information in there, let's say I had a city like Seattle and then I changed it, I misspelled Chicago. Well, the error button would show up, but it would still have all the information for Seattle. So this clears all the information for Seattle. And I was also noticing that if I had an error and then I put in something like Seattle, I'd still get that red bar. So set display goes all the way down here, and it says we're going to get the element by the ID, which is what we created, and we're going to have the display between none and flex. None means you can't see it, flex means you can. And I did something similar for set text, where I passed in the ID and the text that you wanted it. So over here, I took the API, and this is the key that I created. Let me show you guys the API site. So this is open weather, and you can sign in to create your own API key, which you're going to put right here, and then you put the city name. So if you copy this with the city name and your API key, you're going to get this. And if you're ever curious if your API is working or not, all you do is you plug it in to the bar right here, and you'll get information from it, whether it's working or not. So instead of having to guess a lot, you just watch, have it go in here, make sure you get the data that you need. And then right here, we're going to use this XML HTTP request. This is an AJAX call that you use with vanilla JavaScript. So to get new information, there's two ways to do it. You can either completely refresh the page, which is noticeable and takes a while, or you can do an AJAX call. An AJAX call is you're only taking a little bit of the page and refreshing it. It looks a lot nicer, it's a lot quicker, so unless you need to do a ton of content change, usually it's best just to use an AJAX call. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do an open call. And there's two types that you normally would use. You do to call a third-party API, or to call any type of API. There's get, and then there's post. Now, get just gets the information. So if you're using someone else's information, you're going to use a get. A post is if you're using your own API or a database, and you need to update it with information. So because we're using an API, we're only going to use get. Then we're going to use a send, which actually sends it out. Now, two other things. There's response type and onload. On response type equals JSON, when you get something from a database, there's always a little bit of funky characters that show up because of translation between how it's held in the database and how your JavaScript works with it. So when you change it to JSON, it turns out into this object, which makes it really, really easy for you to use. So this is what it returns. And basically, you get something called, I usually call it data. And then if you want to get the coordinates, longitude, you do data.coord.lon. What we're going to use is .main.temp, which will get us the temperature. By the way, it's not 300 degrees in Seattle right now. In Fahrenheit, that's Kelvin. I don't know why open weather does it in Kelvin, but I had to change it back. I had to change it to Fahrenheit because Kelvin would look really weird. So the first thing I say is that if data message. So what's going on here? Well, let's say I misspell Seattle. Oops. It's going to say, hey, this hasn't been found. And I noticed there was a pattern here. Anytime there's a problem with either your API key or what you typed in, you're going to get this error message. So I figured, why not just say, hey, if you have this error message, I'm just going to set the text of error saying location not found, please enter another location. I know my API key works, so I don't need to do that, but there's always a possibility someone can misspell something. So I also added these two classes from Bootstrap. BG Danger sets your background to red, and then the text white puts that text in there to white so it appears, so it stands out more. So if we go back here, see how it's red and then white. A couple other classes, there's BG Success, which is green, Warning, which is yellow, and BG Success, which is blue. And then I set the display to flex. Now let's say it gets good information and there is no data message, because in this case it doesn't return any message. Then I'm going to get data.main.temp minus 273, and this is the formula to convert it from Kelvin to Fahrenheit. And then I set the text for the city, the weather, the temperature, and then I decided instead of, it didn't give you anything graphical, so why not add some funny GIFs in there? So this is if it's cloudy, this is if it's sunny, raining, snow, and extreme was an option, so I put an asteroid heading to Earth. And then after that, it displays flex for temperature, weather, and city. So this is the code behind what I built right here. Hope you enjoyed and you learned a little bit about it. I hope I broke everything down. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks a lot.